Dan's new deal, the new contract signed, the extension signed between Dan Lanning and the University of Oregon last week signals a hyper level of commitment on both sides to bringing a championship to Eugene, Oregon. We're taking a trip back into the way back machine and talking a little Duck history with Rian Winter of Sport Chat 503, ranking the top 5 Duck teams of all time, the top 5 Duck quarterbacks of all time, and the top 5 Duck running backs of all time. This is going to be a good one. It's that show out west. Welcome to that show out west for that team out west, an unbiased, neutral observer's view of Oregon Ducks football. I'm Ted LaRue. We're kicking this one off with shout-outs, congratulations to some new promotions and some new titles and some new assignments within this Oregon Ducks coaching staff. Let's start with Drew Mehringer. He's been the tight ends coach on this Oregon staff since 2022. Hey, let's add a co-offensive coordinator. Terrence Ferguson has become one of the best tight ends in Oregon history under the watch of Drew Mehringer, and seeing him now work a little bit more closely with Will Stein in the co-OC title really warms my heart as someone that played tight end and really thinks the tight end position can be an extremely valuable piece of this Duck offense going forward. Talked ad nauseum about Kenyon Sadiq since this show has launched, and I've talked about the future of the tight end position. I love everything about that promotion, certainly for Drew. And how about guys like Rashad Wadoud taking over the cornerbacks, Cameron Aragi taking over the edges right now, Koakai taking over as assistant quarterback coach. All of these guys have been GAs, analysts, kind of in these lower level coaching roles since Dan Lanning came into Eugene in 2022. They've all been on this staff during that time. And this is kind of how Dan operates. He has a really good ability to go out and find really good, really young coaches, bring them up through the ranks, let them learn from other experienced coaches at their specific coaching groups, at their position groups, and then when the time is right, the promotion happens. The same thing happened with Brian Michalowski this past season, and you saw what happened when he took over the inside linebackers, the jumps that Bryce Betcher made, the jumps that Devin Jackson certainly made as well. So you certainly are excited to see that from some of these guys certainly as well. Heard a lot of good things about Cutter Leftwich. He's going to be taking over as the assistant offensive line coach. He was on this Duck staff in 2023. He left to go to North Texas in 2024 to be the head offensive line coach over there. Of course, Mike Cavanaugh was on the staff, and when he left, there was an opening, and I heard Cutter Leftwich was certainly in the discussion to be the new assistant offensive line coach, and I am thrilled that he is certainly coming back to Oregon. He's been someone that I've heard a lot of really good things about. Congratulations on all these guys. Hey, with spring football approaching, now it's time for these guys to get to work. Maybe much to the dismay of some Oregon football rivals out there, Dan the Man ain't going anywhere. There is wet concrete around the feet of Dan Lanning, and it's drying pretty quick. His feet are going to be in Eugene, Oregon for a while. Oregon and Dan Lanning signed a new 6-year contract last week that will keep Dan in Eugene through at least the 2030 season. This new contract makes him a top 5 paid head coach in the sport of college football. You're looking about a $2 million bump per year. The contract coming up this season starts him off at a $9.4 million salary, and it's $0.2 million more every year. At 2030, he ends at about $10.4 million. Lanning will continue to receive a $1 million per year deferred compensation program. And the buyout, $20 million. Make it $100 million. Make it $200 million, because the commitment between Oregon and Dan Lanning is at an all-time high. I believe Dan Lanning's commitment came when Nick Saban retired, and there was a lot of smoke. There was a lot of heat surrounding Dan Lanning's name and that Alabama coaching job. And when he put out that 1-minute viral clip, I will stay in Oregon as long as Eugene will have me. The grass is damn green in Eugene. If you're afraid of your coach leaving to go to another job, come to Oregon. Come to Oregon right now. That was Dan cementing and telling the Oregon administration, I don't care about anything else. I have everything I need here in the Pacific Northwest. I have everything I need. You have provided me everything I need here in Eugene to build and maintain a championship level of football. And then I believe this contract, offered by Rob Mullins, offered by this administration, approved by the board, was Oregon's return saying, we believe in you. We believe that you are indeed one of the very best coaches in college football. We trust in your vision. Why the hell would anybody not trust in Dan Lanning's vision? Certainly right now. But I believe now that they have complemented each other. They have both invested and pushed all of their chips into the middle of each other's table. Dan Lanning to Oregon, Oregon to Dan Lanning, certainly right now. And then when you look around at Dan right now and really his future specifically in college football, I talked about how Eugene, Oregon has everything. There have, for 20 years, for a long time, there have been immense resources to win a lot of football games, and Oregon has won a lot of football games. But there you have resources. You have the man in charge that knows how to take advantage of said resources. Oregon has everything. I look around at some of these other jobs in college football, and when Dan doesn't care about Alabama, when Dan doesn't care about the oil money at Texas A&M, when jobs like that come open, you know he's bought in. He and the staff and the administration are completely bought in to bring a championship, multiple championships possibly, to Eugene, Oregon as well. I think Dan's ceiling for this Ducks program is still to be determined. He's still a very young head football coach, guys. He is learning at an elite level. I talked about that. I think, we talked about the Rose Bowl and the lessons learned from that. I still think that there are lessons being learned in the early years of his head coaching reign right now at Oregon. We don't know where this ceiling is going to be. And considering Oregon just went through the Big Ten schedule, winning all 10 of their Big Ten games prior to the college football playoff, winning the Big Ten title in year one, Dan Lanning progressively climbing up the ladder when he started at 10 wins, that's pretty darn good. That's a pretty darn good floor to certainly start at. We don't know where it's going to be. That ceiling. We don't know where the peak of the Mount Hood is when it comes to Oregon football. Like, you see the mountain in the air, but the clouds are hanging on top of the mountain. You don't know where the peak is. And that's extremely exciting. But, I think Dan Lanning knows where he thinks the peak can certainly be for this Oregon football program. And that's at the very top, at the very peak of college football, certainly itself. Nothing makes sense for Dan to ever leave for another college football job. I think eventually down the road, the NFL may come calling 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line. 15 years down the line, however long down the line. Dan Lanning has said in the past, hey, I'd kind of like to coach in the National Football League before, but right now my feet are planted in Eugene, Oregon, and making this team as successful as they can possibly be right now. Leaving for another job in college football just does not make any sense. Dan's here, and the thing that Dan has been really, really good at as well, building relationships and surrounding himself with great people. His two guys that are sitting to his left shoulder and his right shoulder, his two coordinators, are also getting new contracts, are also being extended as well. Defensive coordinator Tosh Lupoi, about $2 million per season through 2027. And then the offensive coordinator, of course, Will Stein, just below that at $1.25 million through the 2027 season. Certainly as well. Part of Dan's success, as I said, has been surrounding himself with really good position coaches and then these really good coordinators as well. Of course, Will has done a phenomenal job since succeeding Kenny Dillingham with this offense, developing the quarterbacks, what he was able to do with Bo Nix in 2023, and then what he was able to do with Dylan Gabriel, certainly in 2024. I'm really excited to see what he can do with the guy with probably the best arm talent that Oregon has had in Dante Moore coming up. And I think Will Stein, and to a certain extent Tosh Lupoi, but maybe a little bit more with Will Stein. I think he saw what Kenny Dillingham was able to do, leaving for a Power 4 job, having success at Arizona State, and I think he wants to maybe in the future, you got to think Will, if he kind of keeps this up, he's going to be a head coach one day. I think he's going to kind of stick around in Oregon. He knows how much he's building his legacy, how much he's really building his resume, with each year of great offensive football at Oregon that he is leading and that he is play calling for. So I think if he does depart, certainly down the road, it's going to be for a pretty high-level job. A Power 4 job, maybe a Power 2 job, but hey, both of these guys coming back next season, and it is really tough. I've said this before. It is really tough when you have the success that Oregon has had to retain your coordinators. Nick Saban went through coordinators year after year after year, not necessarily comparing the current state of Oregon to Nick Saban, Alabama right now, but it's really tough. But they've been able to retain their great coordinators and really good position coaches as well. That grass, yeah, it's damn green in Eugene right now. Ever since the launch of this show, ever since the launch of this channel, ever since the launch of this podcast, been focused on the present. But today we're taking a trip back into the time machine, back in the way back machine to look at some of the history of Oregon Duck football. And I'm not sure if there is someone that I would rather have to talk about the history of Oregon Duck football than somebody that's seen it all in Autzen Stadium and, well, teaches history himself. He is the host. He is the founder of Sports Chat 503. He is the unofficial mayor of Rockaway Beach, Oregon. We welcome in Rian Winter from Sports Chat 503. Rian, it's always great to see you. It's always great to talk to you. Welcome to the program. Are you ready to talk some Duck history here today?
Always, Ted. Thank you so much.
So let's dive into it. We're going to start with the top 5 teams in Oregon history. So top 5 teams, top 5 quarterbacks, and top 5 running backs. I'm going to say my picks. I'll say Ryan's picks as well. And then we'll kind of dive into a little bit what each one of these teams, quarterbacks, running backs, etc., kind of meant to this Oregon Ducks program over the years. First thing, top 5 teams in Duck history. Ryan had 2012 as the top team, 2010 at number 2, 2014 at number 3. The latest team, Big Ten champion Ducks of 2024, sitting there at the 4th spot, and the Joey Harrington-led 2001 team at number 5. For myself, I also had the 2012 team at number 1. I had 2014 at number 2, with 2010 coming in at number 3, and I got 2 Lanning era squads at 2024 sitting there at number 4, and the number 5 team, of course, the Bo Nix-led 2023 team. So let's talk, Ryan, first about the team that we both had as the number 1 team in Duck history. Man, that 2012 squad was next level. And if there's a 14 playoff or 12-team playoff like there is now, Oregon would have been certainly one of the favorites to maybe make a run in that particular year. You're talking about a team that averaged almost 50 points per game outside of their loss to Stanford. The closest anybody came to these guys was a 43-21 game at Arizona State. Oh, by the way, a freshman, Marcus Mariota, 32 touchdowns in that season, completed 68% of his passes. Let's talk about Marcus Mariota. When you first saw this guy, a freshman quarterback from the island out there in Hawaii, did you see it right away that you knew this kid was special, certainly from the outset?
Well, yeah, there was a lot going on then because you had Darren Thomas, who is another Oregon great. It kind of felt like he had the writing on the wall. He saw that this kid was going to be awesome, and he opted out of his last year in an era now where with NIL and everything else, he would be getting paid more than he would be making in any sort of professional level. He never made any sort of real professional level outside of some little minor league sort of stuff or whatever, but you could tell right away that Marcus was the guy. And Marcus came out to a team that was absolutely on fire. That 2012 team is really, I mean, as the Ducks have been over the years, this is some what could have been type of teams as well, right? There's some losses on the schedule here. 2012, you got to end with the Fiesta Bowl win, but that was a team that probably should have been playing a better opponent then. And again, that DeAnthony Thomas run back in that thing was one of the greatest moments. I was in the stadium there. I was tailgating with all the K-State fans, and they all were saying the same thing. They said, y'all just can't start fast. If you start fast, we're in trouble. But y'all, if we keep it in the game close, maybe late, and as soon as the thing started, 7 seconds, I was like, it's over. And that's a hell of a team. So, yeah, no, the numbers on that team are crazy. And then that's the last year of Chip. Then Chip leaves after that one, and Helfrich takes over. And, of course, you see really good teams after that as well. So
I was close on the 2014 team with the 2010 team. This is kind of where we differed a little bit. Both teams went to the national championship game and lost in the national championship game. Now, you look at that 2010 team. That was undefeated in the regular season. 2014 had one loss in the regular season, so that certainly plays a factor as well. But I'll say this about the 2014 team. They ended Florida State's 29-game win streak. Remember, FSU went undefeated in that 2013 season. And that 59-20 game in the Rose Bowl, of course, everybody's going to remember that Jameis Winston fumble, Tony Washington taking that thing back in a very memorable score over there. How close in your mind do you think is this 2010 versus 2014 team debate?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, I mean, it seems like they're in totally different eras, but they actually just kind of bookend the same era, right? Because, you know, the 2010 year came out so hot, maybe a little unexpected. The 2014 year is probably a better defense, but the 2010 year, man, was just lightning in a bottle and caught a lot of good breaks. That was before the conference realignment or the 12-team playoff or 4-team playoff, or so there's a lot of stuff where that was kind of the old school, the BCS era. You know, I don't know. It seems to me that, you know, each one of these years, it's hard to compare and contrast. Yeah. I mean, I think it's all about, like, did they win at the end or not? Or, you know, were they better in the regular season or not? Because, you know, the 2014 team, you're right. That the game against Florida State, had we not had to go play Ohio State the next week and lose, that's probably one of the best games of all time. And I was there for that Rose Bowl, and it was amazing being in there. But as soon as the game was over, we immediately switched gears to, all right, well, let's focus on the next game, you know. And we didn't really ever get to really enjoy that win, it felt like. Versus, you know, the 2010, I was at that national championship game as well in the Phoenix. That one, it felt like, was a real tough one because you were so close. And we played Auburn better than anybody had played them pretty much all year. And it was really close at the end. And, you know, there was the whole was dire down thing. And it was all, I mean, there was just so much with that. So it's fun to go back in time and think about these things. It's definitely a wild time. It was a good time to be a Duck, I'll tell you what.
And it still is. And it still
is.
Certainly these days as well. But yeah, that was a debate where I really struggled with that one. That one really went back and forth, certainly for me. For the 2024 team, I had 2024 and 2023 on my top 5 rankings. I thought 2024 had a better defense, and 2023, of course, with Bo Nix, who we will talk about in just a little bit. But you had Bo Nix. I thought they had a better offense, certainly as well. Now, you did not have 2023 on your list, but for now, for the sake of conversation, what's kind of your thoughts on the comparison of the last 2 years of Dan Lanning when you talk about the 23 team and the explosive offensive production as opposed to the 24 team that was probably a better, more well-rounded squad?
Yeah, that's a tough one because they're pretty close. I do think though that both those teams are awesome. I mean, the 2023 team, yeah, I mean, losing 2 close games. The 2024 team, you go undefeated until the very end. It's pretty good. I think it's hard when they're too close together to kind of compare and contrast. But yeah, you're right. No, I tend to think that anything that's happening right now, this is, I think, the best time of Duck football. If you want to go and compare it to all the other previous eras, I think Dan Lanning's the best coach you ever had. If you want to go top 5 coaches, you want to go, the best time to be a Duck right now, it is now. And I think it's only getting better.
Let's talk about that 2001 squad that you had on your list. And I was so close. I think that was a team that was in there. 2007 was also, I know you had that kind of in your honorable mentions. That was in that group certainly as well. But let's talk about 2001 because that was a team. Finished number 2 in the country, a big Fiesta Bowl win. Of course, it was quarterbacked by Joey Harrington. We know all about the billboard in Times Square and all of this was really the team that got Oregon on the national map. What kind of an impact do you think that this 2001 team had as it pertained to the future that was going to come in the coming years for Duck football?
That's a great question as well, man. I think probably just as big of an impact as that national championship 2010 group. It was a solidifying yourself as a new era of football for the Ducks. We had just got the O. Yeah. The new jerseys with Nike and the connection there. And it felt like everything was on the up and up. You just built the indoor practice facility and everything was on the way up. And Joey is a year younger than me. I love Joey Harrington. He grew up in my same area of Portland and they're very intertwined. And it feels great whenever you're comparing and contrasting some of those best teams to put that team up there. They had a lot of professionals as well that came out of there, a lot of pros. That would be the other thing I'd say about the 2023 and the 2024 team. There's a lot of pros that came out of that team. Guys that came out of that thing right away and ready to play like Bucky and Bo. And then also this year with having as many guys go to the combine as they've had. I mean, this probably doubled the amount of guys at the combine for Oregon. So I think that is always what set the 2001 team apart was just how many professionals were on it. If you go back that 2007, 2008, there was a lot of professionals on those teams as well. But yeah, the 2007 year is the kind of what could have been year with the Dennis Dixon situation. That same era is important also to understand is out here. The Beavs had their best year the year before.
That's right. Yep.
So the Beavs went on an absolute tear and won 11 games. The fact that the Ducks answered back and win 11 games, that also kind of sets the tone for a little bit of a gap that Oregon's going to start to create over this next chunk of time against the Beavs as well. So
we've got teams in the books. Now let's head over and talk about quarterbacks. All right, let's unveil the pick, starting with Ryan's top 5. He had Marcus Mariota, 2014 Heisman Trophy winner, of course, number 1. Number 2 is Bo Nix. Number 3 is Dennis Dixon. Number 4, Justin Herbert. And number 5, Joey Harrington. My top 5. Marcus Mariota and Bo Nix, number 1 and number 2. I had Joey Harrington as the number 3. Justin Herbert as the number 4, maybe a little bit of a hot take here, but I've got Darren Thomas sitting there at number 5. I'll talk about Darren Thomas certainly first, and maybe the differences here. Darren Thomas, 26-3 as a starter, was the quarterback that led Oregon to their first ever national championship game appearances. You talk about back-to-back seasons with 30-plus touchdowns. I know maybe leaving early, and you talked about the dynamic behind that with Marcus Mariota certainly coming in, but considering all of those things that I just mentioned, I think he had a pretty impactful run as the starting quarterback of this team. I know maybe skill-wise, when you kind of compare him, arm talent, all those sorts of things, how does he compare to someone like a Dennis Dixon or some of these other quarterbacks? I can certainly see that argument as well. But one thing I want to say about me having Joey Harrington at number 3, and we talked about it when we talked about the top 5 Oregon teams of all time. The impact that Joey Harrington had on Oregon football. We talked about the billboard in Times Square. We talked about just the success that he was able to lead Oregon to have that and really put them on the map. That was a big reason why. You know, when you look at the numbers and stats, certainly there's guys over the history of Oregon football that have put together maybe better seasons and all that, but I just don't think the impact can be understated, especially, you know, a guy growing up in your neighborhood, a local kid, certainly. Let's talk a little bit about Marcus Mariota. Of course, he's the number 1, the only Heisman Trophy winner in Oregon history, 10,796 passing yards, leads Oregon quarterbacks all time. Oregon quarterback all-time leader in touchdown passes as well, and all-time wins as well. Like, what are some of the first things that come to your mind when you think of Marcus Mariota? You look at the talent on the field. I've heard a lot of people say for as good of a talent he is on the field, he's a better dude off the field as well.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you could start with off the field right away. I mean, guy was like an absolute superstar there. He was a complete rock star. And then, I mean, you know, once he got the Heisman, I remember we went to the national championship game and we were at the player hotel and all the players were out except for Marcus because he had a security detail. They wouldn't let him out of the room. And Marcus is such a regular guy. He comes from very humble background in Hawaii, and the guy has a great connection with his family and his friends. The moment was never too big for him. He was so fast at an era where you could start to run the ball with your quarterback more than you could in previous eras. He could throw the deep ball. He was really good with the touch passes, but his ability to run the ball, tuck the ball and go was just absolutely absurd. And he ran like fast and quick at the same time, which is very rare. You know, most guys are kind of quick and twitchy, or they're like big, long striders, right? And this guy was like both. Like, he could get out of the pocket and do some crazy things. He has that one play in the pros where he throws the ball off the guy's hands, catches it, and makes the touchdown. I mean, he just is like a wild athlete. And I also think that like his year where he got to kind of see it from the bench really helped him. And I think that development-wise, I think it's important to realize that year on the bench can really help. And so I'm kind of hoping that this Dante Moore this year is going to be in the conversation in the future that we're going to have here, because if he has what we think he's going to have with the kind of offense and defense, he could have a very special couple of years ahead of him.
Boy, Marcus Mariota coming in at like that 2012 season, his first season as a starter, like that he certainly came onto the scene, bursting onto the scene, and now that we're able to look at it back once again in a retrospective point of view, being able to come in and just quarterback what both of us believe to be the best Oregon team in history, that certainly says some things about Marcus. Bo Nix is interesting because Bo Nix was a highly recruited quarterback, one of the highest ranked quarterbacks when he came out of high school. His dad was a legendary quarterback at Auburn, and he went to Auburn. There was a lot of pressure on him to succeed down south, and it just didn't click. And then when he was able to transfer to Oregon, and those 2 years that he put in, like, he got the Dan Lanning era really kickstarted. And I think those two are really joined at the hip. And for how this era started. We all know that blowout that happened at the hands of the Georgia Bulldogs. And for Lanning, for Dan and Bo to kind of grow together, and what eventually this became at the end of their 2-year run, I thought was impressive. Bo is certainly this high because he's got the greatest single season, edging Marcus Mariota's 2014 season by certainly just a little bit. 4,508 yards passing in 2023 and 45 touchdowns as well. What impressed you the most in the 2 years of Bo Nix?
Bo Nix is an interesting guy. You know, I put him as high as I did because I remember at the end of last year, or his last year at Oregon,
yeah,
we were legitimately having conversations of where does this guy go in the top 5? And there were people who were making the argument that he belongs at number 1. He had already been so mature by his time with Auburn. He knew what he was doing. He needed a quarterback coach that would believe in him. He needed a head coach who would believe in him. And he needed a defense that would keep him in good places on the field and an offensive line that would protect for him. Yep. And, I mean, his stat numbers are crazy. I mean, the amount of sacks that he had in 2 years was nuts. And so the fact that he was able to do what he wanted to do, and then I think the other thing of why I voted him so high was because he had a freaking great year this year as a rookie in the NFL as well. Yeah. I think that Bo Nix, it can't be underestimated. And I love the Bo Nix answer when they asked him right when he got here. They said, "Bo, what did you bring from the South?" And he said, "I brought my Bible." He's on brand.
Let's talk about Justin Herbert a little bit. Local Eugene kid over there. And you kind of mentioned it, maybe handcuffed a little bit, didn't have the success and the victories that maybe some of these other quarterbacks certainly did as well during that Mario Cristobal era. Maybe he'd be a little bit higher if he had a few more victories to maybe go along with it. Like, I kind of toyed around with the idea. I thought Joey Harrington this was something that I kind of struggled with, right? I thought Joey Harrington and the impact that he had certainly on Oregon was huge, but Justin Herbert certainly put up better numbers during his time. What's the legacy, do you think, that Justin Herbert maybe leaves behind when maybe his teams weren't as successful? But what a way to go out in that Rose Bowl victory against the Badgers on January 1st, 2020.
Yeah, well, as a kid growing up, my favorite quarterback and the best quarterback we had at that point in the 80s was Chris Miller. And Chris Miller was another Eugene kid who the people loved dearly. And I think that if you polled Duck fans who's their favorite quarterback, like heartstrings quarterback, it's hard to say it wouldn't be Justin Herbert. I mean, I named my dog Herbert. So, I mean, we're talking about, partially because my dog was born in Eugene.
Nice.
Herbert is somebody different. I mean, shouts out to Mark Herbert, his dad. His brother played on the team, Patrick. Justin Herbert is an absolute legend. Justin Herbert's thing is he will do whatever you ask of him. He's one of those guys. He's just a good boy from the jump. And he handed that ball off to CJ Verdell like nobody's business. But he made Dylan Mitchell a star. And Dylan Mitchell had crazy stats with Justin Herbert. Justin Herbert's first game is probably one of the worst games of all time for the Ducks, going up against the Huskies when the Huskies just wanted to absolutely annihilate the Ducks. And Justin Herbert got thrown in there as a true freshman, the only true freshman to start for the Ducks since Chris Miller. Again, in the 80s. Yeah. So it had been a long time coming. And then he went down to Cal. He had 6 touchdowns in one game as a freshman. Cal, you could see the writing was on the wall. You could see that he was the guy. He was an incredible athlete and a great quarterback. But you just, again, the way that Mario Cristobal ran that offense, those guys ran that offense, it was very tight, and they just handed that ball off. A student body left, student body right, and it was fine. Threw a lot of screens. But at the end of the day, when they needed to run the ball, they ran the ball with Herbert, and he had those 3 touchdowns in the Rose Bowl, like you mentioned. Justin Herbert is an absolute legend. Local guy. He walked to the Duck games. I mean, his entire life, he went to every game. His family season ticket holder. They walked.
Let's move on and talk about the running backs. There's a lot of agreement, and boy, is there a lot of great talent. I kind of chose the running back position just because the tradition of 1,000-yard rushers over the last 10, 15, 20 years at Oregon, and I knew it was going to be really fun to talk about a lot of these electric playmakers over the years. Here is Ryan's top 5. Number 1, LaMichael James. Number 2, Kenyon Barner. You got number 3, Jonathan Stewart. Ducks of a feather going back to back there. Number 4, Royce Freeman. And number 5, Bucky Irving. Mine was almost a mirror image, but I do have a flip-flop in here. I've got James and Barner 1 and 2, just like Ryan. I've got Royce Freeman, the leading rusher in Oregon history, sitting there in the number 3 spot. I've got Jonathan Stewart there at number 4. Bucky Irving, back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons at Oregon after transferring from Minnesota. LaMichael James, of course, is at the top. These 3 seasons. 2009, 1,546, 14 scores. Of course, 2010, that national championship runner-up season. 1,731 yards, 21 touchdowns, third in the Heisman voting. 2011, 1,805 and 18 touchdowns. So 2010, you look at 3 games, over 200 yards on the ground in October 30th matchup, 36 carries, 239 yards, 3 touchdowns. I believe that was against USC. I didn't write down the opponents here. 2011, 4 games, over 200 yards rushing. Is there a game or a moment that sticks out in your head when you think of LaMichael James at Oregon?
LaMichael James. You know, the run I always like with LaMichael is the one down at Tennessee. On the sideline. Yep. LaMichael is, again, an incredible person. Such a great dude, and really funny. Really a funny dude. Like, God, man, his energy is awesome. He's one. If you're out here, maybe you could be able to swing by his Killer Burger and meet him, because he's there at the ready. The thing I love about LaMichael is that it was always kind of like, I mean, he treated the game very seriously, don't get me wrong, but he always just felt like he was just having fun. Yeah. And you know, I think that people kind of used his size and his weight against him when he went to the next level, but I still think that I don't know why he didn't get a better look in the NFL. I guess it is the timing wasn't right or whatever, yeah. But he is an absolute amazing running back. He can do it all. He's a guy who would himself probably not say that he should be on the number 1 on the list. He's a guy who probably would say Jonathan Stewart should be number 1.
Sure. Yeah, and then you look at the rest of this list. You mentioned, like, Kenyon Barner and Jonathan Stewart had, I think, 1,700-yard seasons, 1,800-yard seasons, certainly respectively as well. I believe Jonathan Stewart, his big season was the 2007 season, of course. Royce Freeman. You know, here's what I want to say about Royce. I think when you talk about maybe some of the best Ducks of all time, like when people say running backs, they're probably going to think of LaMichael James and Kenyon Barner and Jay Stu and some of these guys. But Royce Freeman, when all was said and done, the leading rusher in Oregon history, maybe a little bit of a bigger, more powerful back. How do you kind of handicap Royce Freeman and his running style, maybe compared to some of these other guys of the James, of the Barners, DeAnthony Thomas? I know he was kind of a hybrid certainly as well, but some of these smaller, speedier guys compared with maybe a little bit of a power running style.
Yeah, Royce was just a bell cow. I mean, he played all 4 years. He ran the ball all the time during his era. He rarely got hurt. He was a 3-down back. You know, he just answered the bell every single time you needed him to. I think Jonathan Stewart's probably. I always tell Ruben Drones whenever I see him, I think that Ruben, while he was healthy, was probably the best running back they ever had. Yeah. But it was between the injuries, right? But I think Jonathan Stewart's probably the best of them all. Big picture, going to the NFL, having a great career in the NFL, had a great career at Oregon. I mean, this is a guy who was an absolute stud coming out of high school. This was kind of at the era, before you have all the social media and everything on the internet. He would have been an absolute sensation in the modern era where you have all the recruiting videos and everything. Oh my gosh, he was just unbelievable. Another great guy, super smart. I love Kenyon. I think Kenyon one of the best Duck ambassadors we can have. I'm so glad that they have him in the flock. Every time I see Kenyon, always feel like I'm talking to like an absolute superstar. I mean, the guy looks perfect at all times. I saw him at the Rose Bowl, right before the Rose Bowl. He's in a full suit. He's just doing the stuff from the Pac-12 or the Big Ten or whatever the heck thing it is. And I'm like, dude, look at you, man. I was like, how are you not completely busting out of the suit? He's like, oh, I'm sweating. But the guy looked perfect. I mean, just perfect. And his running style is amazing because he's so low to the ground. He's a guy who's a DB. He came in as a DB. And when they moved him over to running back, he just exploded. He wants contact. He likes to run through guys. Yeah, man, I think that it's fun to see LaMichael and Kenyon at the top of that list for you both and you and me, because they're kind of a package deal in my mind too. Both of them are like best friends. They had a great time here. They were one of the best duos you could have had. And then you add DeAnthony Thomas as the scat back with those two. I mean, how can that be any better?
We got a shout out to both. You mentioned Kenyon Barner and what he's doing with the Big Ten Network now, and shout out to him and Jay Stu for the great work that they're doing with Ducks of a Feather right now to benefit Oregon student athletes, and then their podcast certainly as well. I've been really a big listener to them certainly and what they're doing over there. Bucky Irving. Okay, so on my list. Obviously, that's recency. We're kind of looking at what Bucky was able to do, and I was maybe trying to find ways to not have a recency bias and maybe kind of take a look at some of these other guys, but I just always came back to Bucky Irving. Back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons on very successful Duck teams, very balanced Duck teams, I think as well, and I had to find a way to put Bucky certainly at that number 5 spot.
Also had a great year this year in the NFL, right?
Yeah.
I mean, one of the breakout rookies from this class that he's in, an absolute born football player. The guy looks literally the part. If you were to say, what should a running back look like? One of the first moves when Coach Locke came in was to bring in both Bucky and Noah, and couldn't have asked for better guys to come into that room, ready to work on day one. We're the best running backs in the room. And it was just an amazing time to watch Bucky grow, because I think there's something to be said about the fact that Bucky could play all of those downs, never really lost any weight, came in at basically the same weight that he was when he left, just absolutely chiseled. Great guy, great individual, spoke very highly of his teammates, had a great time on the sideline. And Bucky is that dude, and he's built to be a professional. He's built for the NFL.
I was mulling over Jeremiah Johnson. He of course was behind Jonathan Stewart, and when he really got his opportunity to shine, I think his last year was 2008 if I'm not mistaken. 1,200 yards, double-digit touchdowns, 2 seasons with 10 plus touchdowns. He was kind of mixed in there. There was an era with LeGarrette Blount was also in there as well. I know you recently had an interaction with Jeremiah, giving his game-worn jersey back and all that. Speak to Jeremiah, because maybe he isn't maybe thought of as, we talk about these top 5 lists, but he's someone that I remember watching when Oregon really grabbed my attention. I really love to watch him run the football.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's so many running backs. I mean, you can keep going back. Terrence Whitehead. Sean Burwell. I mean, Ricky Whittle. They're just the list goes on and on and on. But yeah, no, Jeremiah Johnson was awesome. I got to give him his jersey. My aunt had picked up that jersey in some sort of an auction or whatever. It was the first jersey with the wings. The first time the Ducks had the wings. It was against Arizona in 2007, I think, or 2008. I think 2008. And yeah, dude, he was such a great player for the Ducks. His most memorable run to me was at Oregon State. The Beavs could have gone to the Rose Bowl 2 years in a row, and the Ducks beat them both years. And the second time, it was whoever won that game went to the Rose Bowl, and the Ducks went to the Rose Bowl because they won. But Jeremiah Johnson up there in Corvallis had this breakaway. I want to say it's like a 79-yard touchdown or something. And halfway through the run on the sideline, the ball pops out of his hands as he's running, regathers it on the way for the touchdown. But yeah, no, great guy, great individual, lives in Eugene, got a great family. And yeah, no, I was always wanted that jersey to go back to him. And when I asked him if he had much of his jerseys, because I expect some of these guys, they got a whole room full of their stuff.
Right.
And then he's like, no, I don't really have anything. And I was like, well, then I got something for you.
We got something for you, my man. Final thoughts, Ryan, as we wrap it up talking about the running backs.
Yeah, I mean, the running back position, like I said, I think, the bigger guys don't really get the same sort of love that the smaller guys do. So you get guys, like a Reuben Drones or like a LeGarrette Blount. LeGarrette's basically my size as a running back, hurdling people, dude. I mean, he was an absolute freak. And then the other guys who I thought should be on this list somewhere, somehow, they're the tweeners between a wide receiver, between a running back, is DeAnthony Thomas and Ahmad Rashad, two guys that can play both running back or wide receiver. And then I think DeAnthony Thomas is still probably the most important single recruit Oregon's ever got.
Yeah.
I think there's still guys here in 2024, 2025 who say they want to be the next DeAnthony Thomas. They're still watching highlights of DeAnthony. I mean, when I tell and see DeAnthony in person, I always say, thank you so much for coming here. You have no idea how important that was. Chip Kelly created a different role for him that kind of made him out to be something. You can't really put him on any of these lists. So I just thought of like best players. Yeah. And Anthony Thomas is one of those guys who's just is still in the hearts and minds of a lot of Duck fans, probably one of the best players of all time. In Oregon history.
Run that sticks out to me, that long run against Wisconsin in the Rose Bowl for DeAnthony, if I'm not mistaken, our guy Nick Cody lifting him into the air during that Rose Bowl, that great game that went back and forth between the Badgers that specific year as well. Ryan, this was awesome. This was awesome. As you say to me sometimes, Ryan absolutely brought it. A lot of excitement certainly coming up for this year. You're a big reason why you and your familia are a big reason why this show exists. I'll always be thankful to you, and thanks for joining me here today.
Well, thank you so much, Ted. Like you got me down memory lane a little bit. I remember a time when they used to have umbrellas at Autzen Stadium. I remember a time they used to be able to smoke cigarettes in Autzen Stadium. I remember before they came out on the motorcycle.
Yep.
I remember, all these different things. My whole life, it's been the same announcer, Don Essig. It's been basically the same Duck over time. Shifted a little bit here and there, but what makes Oregon special is the people, and you've definitely seen this with you creating your shows and having as much interaction with as many Duck fans are out there. The Ducks, we love our Ducks. We're a very unique community out here. We just like it when other people like what we like. And so as soon as you came onto the scene and started liking us, we got to like that right back. So yeah, thank you so much, Ted. And if you're out here on the interwebs, check me out, Sports Chat 503. And also my son is a great follow, Darby Winter Photo on Instagram or Twitter. He's a photographer on the field for the Ducks. So it's a good time to be a Duck. And I don't think it would be any better of a fall to be there this year as a kid who's a freshman in college, get to go undefeated their first year in the Big Ten. How about them apples, man? How about that?
I was just about to ask Ryan, where can people find you? But Twitter, Instagram, and all that as well.
Sports Chat 503. As I say, a guy told me, he says, you need to promote yourself more. He says, you were the first one. So I do now claim to be the first Ducks podcast since 2010.
Wow.
Let's go. Speaking of all these years.
The year I graduated high school. The year I graduated high school was the year Sport Chat 503 came into existence. Ryan, thanks again.
Appreciate you, Ted. Thank you so much for what you do.
A gigantic thank you to my main man, Rian Winter of Sports Chat 503, the OG of Oregon Ducks podcast out there, talking some history, some great history, of course, electric history that Oregon football certainly has, and maybe some more historical conversations with Ryan will come a little bit later this summer. All right, great TSOW here today. I'm Ted LaRue. We will see you on the next edition of That Show Out West.